Monday, we had new neighbors, an elderly couple from Oklahoma City, very friendly. We spent about an hour chatting with them about their trip to BC, and they gave us a whole bag of oranges. We sat around, and I took a swim, and that evening Lloyd and I went to the Trade Winds, played pool, and had burritos. The next morning, we packed up and left, had a last beer at the Trade Winds, and then drove west through Port Isabel and Harlingen on 107 to Edinburgh. It was beautiful, and we were sorry to be leaving the coast. Headed north through pretty ranch country, had supper at a roadside restaurant, and drove until after dark. Had coffee and donuts in a greasy old cafe bar in a town called George West, and then camped out by the road. Next morning I crawled out of the camper and had an orange. A large car and trailer pulled in, and the man came over to talk. He turned out to be from Sault Ste. Marie, so we visited for quite a while. Lloyd and I drove north on back roads past quaint little towns, including Kennedy and Nixon. Hurrying to Austin now, we drove right into the city, headed downtown, walked around the state capitol for a while, then to a library and read some newspapers, drove around out to Zilker Park to have supper and do our laundry for the very first time. That night we went to the Silver Dollar South. It was a huge new sterile bar with a band called A Little Bit of Texas. They were okay. We drank there until closing time and slept. Next day it was cloudy. We went down to Zilker Park for breakfast. It was almost noon and getting warm. I looked at the Barton Creek pool and saw a guy going to swim. Went over to the entrance and found out it was a public pool, free for the winter time. It was a dammed up natural spring with clear cool water and a sidewalk all around, but natural creek bottom. It looked great. I went back to the truck and told Lloyd I wanted to go swimming. I changed and jumped in. Sure, it was cold, but great compared to the Gulf waters. I could stay in and enjoy swimming in this. I swam and walked around, talked to people. There were students from various states studying at U of T there who we chatted with. Lloyd joined me in the pool. Finally, we changed and went out to a little art gallery called Laguna Gloria on the Lake Austin banks. We enjoyed the photo shows. From there we went back to the south end of town to a 10-minute oil and lube job, which the old truck needed by now. Had coffee and donuts, phoned around to various bars, and then went back to Zilker Park for supper. It was getting cold, and the worst-looking storm clouds you can imagine passed by overhead, without more than 2 drops falling. We went out on North Lamar to the Soap Creek Saloon to see Alvin Crow. It was a neat little bar with a low ceiling and stage with dance floor. But when the floor was full, we couldn't hardly see the band. They were good, though. Did a lot of rock and roll for dancing as well as bluegrass fiddle tunes. They did the song Time Fades Away so well. It was one of the best songs of the whole trip. Coffee at Winchell's and slept on a side street. Got up and hit the road out of town immediately for Houston to see Asleep at the Wheel tonight at the Texas Opry House. I drove on 290. We stopped for gas at Manor. We had breakfast at a rest stop somewhere, and Lloyd took over the wheel at Brenham. Cruised into Houston in early rush hour traffic and headed downtown. Went to the public library where we rested and read for over an hour. We phoned Randy, but he didn't know yet if they would come to the show because Leslie wasn't home. So we went off to the Opry House, went in and sat down in a good spot, and Lloyd went out to eat. When he came back, I went out, had a burger, phoned Randy again, but no, Leslie was tired, so they invited us to come over after the show. Asleep at the Wheel were good, real good, but I was sober as a judge and didn't get into the show before it was over. One of the guys, the keyboard player I think, could really dance, and he boogied all over the stage in one number. After the show we went out to Randy's and had a good time sitting there in his living room drinking and chatting and watching The Tube, another bizarre movie. Slept there. We were awakened by Randy's friend Chris banging on our door and impersonating a policeman arresting us for sleeping on the street. We all went for breakfast in Randy's car to Ninfa's, where even the Mexicans were eating. We ordered beers and plenty of food, although mine wasn't enough, so I finished everybody else's. It was real good, and I was turned on to Mexican food. Got full, we left, and drove around in the rain for a while. Randy stopped and bought beer to drink while driving. Went to the Galleria, a high-class shopping center with a skating rink in the middle. Shopping with Randy and Leslie was fun but tiring. We tried on hats and sunglasses, looked at boots and jeans, smelled pipes and cigars, and had a beer overlooking the rink. Finally, we went back to their place where I almost wanted to take a nap. But no, the guys were going to a bar to play shuffleboard, so I went too. There was no stopping today. We played 2 games of shuffleboard, then changed to pool, playing each other in a round robin. I enjoyed pool that night for the first time in a long time. Then I saw they had a big screen in the bar part of the place, so we watched Saturday Night Live and drank draft pitchers It featured Rick Nelson and Gilda Radner as a punk star in her own fame. Finally, we went back to Randy's and watched more TV before hitting the sack. It had seemed like a very long day. When we got up, Randy was watching TV in bed, so Lloyd and I went for breakfast with Leslie and Chris. She was great, and it was fun getting to know her better. All afternoon, we sat around drinking and watching TV and helping Leslie cook up a huge supper. Meatloaf, brown rice, squash, and beans. Great! More TV and visiting and discussing plans for going to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. It's all up in the air due to a police strike, and Les and Randy have another couple to go with if it does go ahead. Randy showed me some old magazines to read, and I discovered an article about spontaneous combustion, the very one Greg at South Padre Island had quoted, and I hadn't really believed him. Next day, we had lunch with Randy before he left on a business trip. Turns out he does work at something. Lloyd and I went off on our own, visited an art store, and then went to Herman Park to relax. I cleaned the truck and the cooler, and Lloyd went for a long walk. He took these pictures. I sat in the cab and wrote, catching up on this diary. Later, Lloyd and I went to movies, saw a retro double bill of East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause, then back to Dunkin' Donuts and to sleep in our camper. Went for coffee and then to a park north of downtown where we had our camper breakfast. I walked into downtown and ended up reading in the library for hours. Maclean's magazine brought on a wave of homesickness. Lloyd eventually joined me, and we called Leslie, who was not home, so we went to see the movie Hardcore at a posh suburban theater. Then we phoned Les again, and she invited us over. Were we wearing out our welcome? She was so hospitable. Wanted to hit the hay, but said we could watch TV, so we did, and she left the door open for our night needs. In the morning I had a shower and we breakfasted. We attended to our truck upkeep, got a new spare, and killed the rainy afternoon at a movie, Superman, then to the Contemporary Art Gallery. Supper at Bubba's Barbecue, and to the Alley Theatre to see Artichoke by Saskatchewan playwright Joanna M. Glass. We were in the cheap seats, but it was cool to see dressed-up Houstonites learning about life on the Canadian prairies. The play was excellent, funny and witty. I loved the two old bachelor farmers and their comments on the neighbors' family problems. Afterwards, we retired to a bar called the Airship to toast our adventure and drink several pitchers of beer and play many games of pool. Then to Jerry's Donuts and we talked about Canada and U.S. and politics and life and living and what to do and all that good bullshit. Finally, we retired to the street in front of Leslie's house. Our last full day in Houston. After breakfast with Leslie, we went off to play pool and drink beer. Also visited Cactus Records, where the clerk was curious about the Forklift tour. Then we dropped in on Barb and Dwayne, the other couple we'd met at Jerry Jeff's show. Again, genuine Houston hospitality. We drank beer and watched TV. Barb did show us the pics she had taken of Jerry Jeff and us, including me with the beer on my head. We laughed and returned to Leslie and Randy's for a last visit. Showered them with gifts and thanks. Big case of beer and a bottle of champagne. Then we slept in front on their driveway and said goodbyes in the morning, heading west on I-10 to Columbus, where we brunched. Then on 71 and into Austin. Downtown Austin at the Special Events Center, we got tickets for an upcoming Amazing Rhythm Aces and Jimmy Buffett show. We filled up on burgers and fries and headed to the Armadillo World Headquarters for an Earl Scruggs review show that evening. We parked and saw the group bus and old Earl walking around, so we walked around a bit too. Lloyd phoned a landlord to set up a next day meeting at a house we wanted to rent some rooms in. Then we walked around some more and waited at the entrance as the crowd began to line up behind us. The Elvis Costello concert was on at the Austin Opry House, and a lot of people wished they were there, but it was sold out apparently. We were happy where we were anyway. We finally got in and found it was a huge concert hall with no tables, so we took a front row seat on the second level and began drinking and waiting. Warm-up band, Eddie and Martha Adcock and the second generation, played some good guitar. But the Earl Scruggs review were superb, great, fantastic. One of the Sun's electric guitars was amazing, and the whole show turned out to be brilliant. So much better than when I had seen them in Vancouver 4 years before that at the Commodore. I left on a cloud, flying high, and wanting to go drink more beer. So we went downtown to the After Hours Club, thinking it would be open till dawn, but it closed at 2. We drove off and parked by the river for the night.